So let's switch it up a bit and try a more involved example. And throughout my career, I just can't get away from billing systems and shopping carts and things like that. Next week I'm going to be starting yet another billing system for a client. It's just one of these things that just follows me around everywhere. So that's what was in mind when I was writing this. So let's model a very simple e-commerce checkout. We've got something we've got an object to represent a class, to represent a single line item in an order. And we've got an order class to wrap that all in. It has a constructor where we can set the properties of the order. We have a bunch of getters to get information out about the order. We don't have setters. Remember I said earlier about we don't change input values, we create new values from it. So instead of this, we have what effectively are factory methods, but they're more transform methods. I'm not sure what the adopted term would be. Transform methods, maybe. Kind of describes what they do. I'm British, so I have to deal with VAT. Table of VAT. Obviously, a real one would have date ranges, because I'm told VAT can go down as well as up, although I can't remember that ever happening. I'm told it can. But it's very easy for this example to create a mocked-up order for us to explore and play with, okay? Very easy indeed. It's as easy as that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you using ROP how to create some business logic around this order. And one of the things I like about ROP is the fact that it allows us to keep the business logic separate from our data model. I'm old school. When I was taught to build commercial applications in the 90s, you didn't munge these things together. They cooperated, they communicated, but they were separate things because they changed at different rates. And therefore, you didn't want them all to be one and the same. Because often you can create new business logic without having to change your entities, like if you keep them separate. It gives you long-term flexibility, and it's also a way to keep your system so you can modularize it and test it in isolation and stop bugs creeping in. That's how I was taught to build code in the pre-web industry. Showing my age there. I worked on Eurostar's ticketing system in the 90s as one of many, many developers. I wasn't an architect by any means on it. I was just yet another developer on it. But that's where I learned some of these tricks and approaches. You know, they were building real software that had to work all the time. Because if it didn't, not only did they not sell tickets, but it was in next day's press. And of course, being pre-web, print cycle is much harder to break out of than the social media cycle we all enjoy today. Enjoy's a choice word. Okay. So the first piece of logic I've got here is about calculating how to calculate the shipping cost. It's just a very simple function, and it's based on the weight of each line item, and we apply a fixed charge to that to calculate shipping cost. There are obviously many other ways to calculate shipping cost, and that's important as we go down the road, but this is where we're starting with. And to calculate VAT is the same thing. We look at the VAT codes for the individual items, find out what the VAT rate is, and just pull it all together. This is not HMRC approved code, of course, so please don't copy this in your own systems. Yeah. Now, both of these functions, they return a new order. They don't change the original order that's been fed into them. So if anything goes wrong, and I'm going to make sure it does in my examples later on, we've still got the original order. And one of the nice things about side effects is you don't have to unwind something as long as you catch it in time. You just throw away the results of your erroneous working, and you've still got your original piece of data to start from. So how do we make these functions composable? Let me pull up the calculate shipping first. See, the thing is, it's got one input and only one input. So how would we make that composable? Sorry, I didn't tell you there'd be a quiz. I apologize. What would you do?
Auto comma error.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so would refactor it to take two parameters? All right. Any other ways? Okay. There's another way. We can wrap it in another function. Because our calculate shipping doesn't actually have anything to do with errors, we can just wrap it and ignore the fact because it doesn't need to deal with it doesn't need to deal with the failure parameter whatsoever. So let's just wrap it for now. And this will make sense as we go down the road. This is something that will need to be tested and see whether it stands the test of time. I don't know whether this is the right approach or not, but you may find that writing functions in a non-ROP style and then wrapping them ultimately is more testable. You may find that easier to test in the long term, especially when we get into partial functions in a moment.
You're presupposing that calculate shipping will never create its own error.
Correct. We're coming back to that. I did promise it would all break. Now, how would we make our calculate that composable? Because the thing is, it takes 2 data parameters. It needs 2 data parameters.
That's where your wrapper solves it, right? Because it's got these guys like hidden away and then comma 2, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. So what we can do, and this is the bit in Scott's talk, the first time I watched it, I went, what the? Because in functional, they do it so naturally, whereas to us, this is really alien. You can write a function that returns a function. Okay? And then that function is the actual wrapped thing that is called in the business logic. And I'll show you the full workings in a moment. And in functional programming, this is as natural to them as doing anything else. But to us, it's really alien. And until we had lambda functions, obviously we couldn't do it at all. But you do this wrapping approach to avoid hard coding these other pieces of data that come in. And let me explain what I mean. So here's our wrapped function. See, the thing is, we want to inject a VAT, our list of VAT codes in. We don't want to hard code that table anywhere, because chances are we're loading it out of a database at some point. So it doesn't actually live in the code at all. So the idea is our wrapper takes the VAT codes, and then it returns a function that's going to actually use those VAT codes we've already passed in. But the function it returns has the correct signature.
PHP 7?
5.6 will do that, I believe. I don't think there's anything 7 specific in that. I don't think there is, because there's no type hinting in there.
No, I'm just looking at the use after the function.
I think that's 5.6.
Yeah.
I think that's 5.6. It's good to call these out. It's good to call them out. Yeah.
So you're basically forcing signatures to be compatible with the pipeline.
Yes, we are. Which is why we need functional. We need to be able to type functions, which is something else we can't do in PHP's type system.
I really miss that from Swift.
Say again?
We can't create a type signature for a function. We can't define that anywhere and give it a name, which is something we really need to be able to do. And again, in functional programming, not only can they do that, but functional programming will do type equivalence in a way PHP can't. But that's a whole topic. Go watch Scott's talk and be envious, because I am. So this is how we call these wrapped functions. Our first one, we've actually created a real PHP function. I'll use that phrase. So we can just call it. The second one, we've created a lambda function. We've returned back a callable, and we've assigned it to a variable. Okay? So we have to call it in this manner. There's our first one. It's a real function. We just call it. And there's our second one. It's in a variable. We call it that way. So it's a slightly different syntax. And I want to ask the room this. How do you all feel about lambda functions? Because 3 years ago, this was all the rage. It was invoke all the things when people were designing frameworks on objects, etc. And as a community, we've moved away from that in the last 3 years. From those communities who were doing it. Leave it to JavaScript.
Yeah, I think it's a bit absurd.
Don't like it?
I always really liked them.
I'm sorry?
I always really liked them.
You really like them?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're useful to solve edge cases that would require you to build a lot more lines of code to solve. I think it's like a dirty hack. We use it in a different paradigm to kind of break out of the paradigm that has limitations.
Yeah.
I think that, in my opinion, that's when it should be used.
I think it's fair to say it's something that's not natural in object-oriented programming. I think that's perfectly fair. You know, it is something from another paradigm. It is very functional. So if I was to sum up for the purposes of anyone watching the video, the majority of the room is meh. The opinions that were expressed, one person likes it, and several people don't, and everyone else is quiet. Would that be fair? Okay, we're going to come back to lambda functions in a moment. I just want to point one thing out about our calculate shipping, as Rob, eagle-eyed, may have spotted this. Whenever you're doing code reviews and you see anything that only takes one parameter, be very suspicious. because chances are some buggers hard-coded something in there that should actually be a second parameter. And this is a rule of thumb that will stand you in good stead whenever you're doing a code review. I'll calculate shipping falls foul of this. When we calculate our shipping cost, there's a number in there. All right, in my example, I've put the number 20 in there. This should actually be a parameter instead. I'm going to use cost per kilo. It doesn't matter what it is, but the point is it should actually be something else that's passed in so it can be changed, so the logic can be reused.
Right, but the problem with that is actually that function does more than one thing.
It does more than one thing?
Yeah.
Okay, why does it do one thing?
Well, if I look at the first one, first you're going through and adding total of all the items, and then you're adding shipping charge. That should be a separate function altogether.
Calculating the total weight should be a separate function. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. This is good. No, this is good. You're starting to think in these terms. This is good.
This is the way I think all the time. I want to break this down. The way I work is that you extract until you can't extract anything. I want everything in a separate function.
Awesome. Does anyone else agree with that?
SRP, right?
Yeah.
What's that?
SRP.
SRP? Yes, single responsibility. Yeah.
Absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But even if we could get let's say we could get the total weight as by calling a getter on order, for example, because you could argue the total weight isn't something that's domain logic, it's entity logic. You could argue. You'd still have to change the shape of this function to pass in how you calculate the cost. Yeah.
You could, I mean, arguably.
Yeah. So for purposes of this demonstration, I'm arguing that that should be a separate parameter that's passed in, so that you can reuse this logic without having the cost itself fixed. That's my argument. So, which means we want to wrap that in the same style as we wrapped calculate that. So now our real function has disappeared and we've created two lambda functions, which is where I'm going with this. There's our two builders. Now, if I'm going through these code examples too fast, do tell me to slow down. Obviously, I've spent a long time poring over these, so they're very familiar to me, but I appreciate you seeing these for the first time. Beer helps, okay. Yeah. But now both of our wrappers are returning lambda functions rather than being genuine PHP functions in their own right. Sorry, hard-coded PHP functions might be the better term. So we're starting to get more and more lambdas. I haven't done this in anger, but my guess is you're going to end up with a lot of lambda functions, and you probably would be better off going all in on lambda and making them all work the same way.
Yeah, I have lambda functions that return lambda functions that return lambda functions. Yeah. And then you're like, where am I in JavaScript?
We are coming to that. We have a slide for that.
It's a good model.
In fact, the next slide, we have the next slide for that.
This is a functional approach to DI.
It is. It absolutely is. So if you are someone who did not express an opinion but quietly is going, oh, lambda functions, no, you will not like this approach in anger. You really won't. I'm sorry. But once you get used to it, it's not so bad. Honest. As long as it's used with discipline.
If I have to read this code to understand what the hell it's doing, I'm going to kill somebody. I mean...
My train's tomorrow morning. Can you wait till then?
I'm sorry. Lambda functions are neat as far as I'm concerned, but one of the things they violate as far as I'm concerned is my function should be named properly.
Okay.
Okay. Why? Because I need to understand what a function is doing.
Okay.
A lambda function doesn't describe what it does.
You're perfectly happy with object variables.
Okay.
Sorry?
You're happy with object variables, these are just function variables.
I wish I'd put that on a slide because that's genius.
What the build blah 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 is just a factory function if it was an object-oriented environment.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Obviously, we assigned it to a
If
variable.
you think about
Okay,
it,
in this
rock
case,
calculate shipping could be an object that happens to have underscore invoking plugin integrated with it.
Okay.
I see this all the time.
I understand what you're saying. I would still like a proper name, even though I know it's repeating names.
I don't necessarily disagree.
Okay.
I mean, the real problem is it's the wrong colour.
Oh,
If it was green, it'd be fine.
Okay. We forget the color. Okay.
One argument I will make is because it's your code calling these builders, you decide what the return value is called. Okay. You can control the naming of the variable that the lambda function is assigned to. Change your address?
So you can't find well, surely you're saying your point is that you want things to be named in a easy to reason about way.
Exactly. That's
and therefore the next one that comes along will be following your easy to reason about name. Right. So you name it how you want it, and then next one will be fine.
Yeah. It does require the mental shift that dollar words is a function call.
No, I don't have a problem with that. That's not a problem.
That's the thing that took me the longest to think about.
Really? No, I'm used to variable function names. That's perfectly fine. Okay. No problem with that at all.
But in this approach, you can control the naming.
Right, I can control the naming, but I just look at that return function.
You mean the name? You mean the name of the function that
exactly.
The name
of
the builder.
That's what I'm talking about.
The builder.
The function that's being returned, I want the name for that. And it's not that I understand there's a builder wrapped around it.
Yeah.
But if this were more complicated,
okay,
it would be a real problem. To me, it would be. Okay. Especially if somebody says, he has lambda functions that return lambda functions that return lambda functions. Yep. I want to shoot somebody for something.
Once you start going down the rabbit hole of nested lambda functions, it can be hard to track things. And this is where tooling and better typing in PHP would help enormously. I came across lambda functions. I went from an environment where they were never used to an environment where they were everywhere overnight. Literally, I ended one place on the Friday, and on the Monday I was dropped into this. And none of the tools I had that I used for writing software and checking software understood lambdas whatsoever. It was a major problem, and it did take a while mentally to shift as well. But the tooling didn't support that whatsoever. So I think this is an environment where tooling and the language could evolve to help us if we want to go down this approach.
Okay.
If we want to.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, if you don't like lambdas, you're going to really not like this by the time we're done. Especially as we get on to what Paul was talking about. These functions that return functions are returning what are called partial functions, because you have to then call the returned function in order to resolve it to a value.
The jQuery for a long time, and
that explains everything.
Lots of JavaScript, loads of JavaScript.
Yeah.
So, the jQuery model was that you call something and then you call the thing, and then you call the thing.
Well, unfortunately, I'm about to encourage people down this track, because we can actually get rid of these builders and create a generic reusable partial function builder, which means we can do exactly what you're talking about. And it just looks like this. It's really simple. Yeah. It's 4 lines of code. So it's 6, 7 with the way I've laid it out. But in PHP would parse that to 4 lines tops. Yeah. So so the function called partial is a builder. It builds a function and returns that function. And it uses splat to gather up whatever parameters you want to inject into the function you're wrapping. And it also takes the name of the function that you're wrapping. And it will take any callable, so you can start to consume any object that's got invoke and that sort of thing on it. And what it does is the function it returns has the signature we want to make it composable. And it's taking advantage of the way use works. I should use the laser pointer doesn't work on that screen. Oh well. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. So the third line, you're unpacking stuff to proper variables.
Yes.
And then the return value on line 4 comes repacked.
Yeah.
So it can give you a signature that's compatible with partial.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep. So that's instead of writing all these handwriting all these builders. You can just do this and you can reuse it. And then below I'm showing you that you can wrap, calculate shipping and pass in the cost. You can wrap, calculate that and pass in the table of VAP codes, and you get a function back.
This does actually solve a problem.
Awesome. Awesome.
We are really punting out.
We're going to punt it some more yet. We've got a long way to go. Now, one thing about this, so the whole point of introducing this is because we can get rid of all these boilerplate. Boilerplate tends to be a maintenance problem long term. But It only works under certain circumstances. The function you're wrapping with this partial thing its first parameter has to be the thing you want in your composable pipeline, that green railway track. It's got to be that type. If it's not, you can't do it because splat will only work if it's the last thing being used in parameter lists. You can't use splat in the middle directly, which leads us on to the next problem. That's why there's an array merge buried in there. Now, in reality, I've actually got faster replacements for array merge. I would never use array merge in Anger ever. Its performance is shite. A for loop in your code will outperform array merge massively every time. So we're trading convenience for some runtime performance because we've got to assemble that parameter list every time the wrapped function is called. Okay, and that happens when you call the wrapped function. It doesn't happen just at the build time. So if you've got a piece of logic that's used 1,000 times in your code, you've got that performance penalty 1,000 times with this convenience wrapper. And type safety is out the window, utterly. So if you can't live with your type safety, you are absolutely going to hate this. Yeah, good man. I tell a lie. Type safety is useful. It's useful, but people put too much faith in it solving the world's problems when it won't. But that's a partial function builder, so you can get rid of all this boilerplate code, and we're going to be using this from now on, okay? So one of the reasons I'm pushing this is about the fact it makes it easy for us to change our business logic. So let's do that. And if there's one thing I've seen break working e-commerce systems, it's when someone goes, why can't we offer discount codes? It sounds so simple, it shouldn't break a sodding thing. But most e-commerce systems that have been built without this find it extremely difficult to add this afterwards. And there's some nodding heads around the room, so I'm glad it's not just me on that one. Okay? It should be easy, and I'm going to show you how easy it can be. So we're going to have some requirements to help make sure our approach is straightforward. So we're going to apply after all other costs, okay? Which means we need an ability to calculate a gross value first before we can apply a discount. And we're just going to reuse all our existing logic to do that and create a lambda for it. Okay? We're just going to do that. And then the second thing is the discount needs to be something as a separate item that is tracked so we can show it to the customer because we want them to feel the love. Yeah? That's the whole point of giving them a discount code is to make them feel happy, and so they'll come back and spend more money with us. We all know it doesn't work in reality. Just look at what happened with coupon-based businesses. But that's the theory behind it.
Wait, is Groupon dead?
No, but the businesses who use it...
I love it.
Yeah. They find they don't get a lot of repeat business because people chase the discount codes rather than the product. That's the thing. Especially when it's rare these days to sell a completely unique product. So there's our calculate discounts, and we're going to wrap it using our partial wrapper. So we don't need a builder anymore. And for purposes of this demonstration, we're going to be very generous and give them 35.5% off.
Bloody hell.
Purpose of this, just arbitrary. But now we've got our calculate gross, and we just calculate our discount. That's it. Very simple.
How can you calculate discount on specific items?
On specific items? I'm going to leave that as an exercise to the reader.
It's an asset too. And we have 5 on get 1 free.
Oh, buy one, get one free?
Yep, 3
I guess you've got another 4 functions to go in. Get all the items, all the items.
But you would build them out as separate functions and build them into your overall pipeline is how you'd do it. You'd have to extend your data entities because you're going to have to start track line item discount codes and discount rules. You're going to have some sort of metadata to help trigger which logic should be done with that. But the point is that I want to make, if you look at that code in there, you'll see that the calculate VAT code and the calculate shipping code is not on that screen at all. It doesn't need to be. We're not touching that at all, which means we're not going to break it. Okay? That's the point of this particular example, is we can extend the system without touching the things that already work, assuming they work. Yeah. And we can continue our pipeline and build a function that calculates the order total all the time. And so someone can call that and they don't need to know whether there's discount codes or VAT shipping and all the rest of it. It's all done for them. We'd just be building a longer pipeline. Is what we can do that. Now you can do this using a more pure imperative approach without using functions. Lambda functions like this. You can build it like this and still use ROP for managing the inputs and the outputs. You can do that. It's perfectly readable. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's got quite a large change surface. And change surface is one of the things we want to make smaller in order to make code more reusable. All the ideas you've thrown at me, this function has to change in order to accommodate those. The way this function is called has to change to take more and more parameters. Okay? You're having to change quite a lot more things with this more pure imperative approach. Whereas with the ROP approach, you don't have to, because we're wrapping things up and isolating them a lot more. So we don't have to change calculate shipping, calculate VAT. We don't have to change how you call calculate total order at all, because the detail is buried down in the workings. It's in our pipeline now. You've got to set it all up, so the setup code has to change, but that's all that's got to change. And if you're starting to track things like buy one, get one free, and things like that, you're going to have to extend your data entities, which for the purposes of brevity, I've left off the video and off the slides tonight. But we're not having to go back and rework things that already exist. Yeah, we haven't touched our gross calculation there whatsoever, even though we've introduced discount codes. Once we've got it, we can just reuse it. As long as the logic behind that never has to change, we don't have to touch it. So all of a sudden, we're touching less things in order to change our system and improve and meet the new changes that the business wants, which means we're not going to break things that already work. And that's something I like about that very much. And if we wanted to switch the logic at runtime, because we're assigning functions to variables, we can do that. We can just control how they're built. So if we want to change the calculate shipping because we're using a different courier, depending on where the customer lives or depending on the items, we load in a different piece of logic. We can do that. And it's just a different function. When the time comes to calculate the value of the order, that code doesn't change whatsoever. It's been given the logic to run. It doesn't worry about what that logic is. And those of you who follow DDD may have come across the specifications concept in there. So this is one way to apply that if you do. If you don't do DDD, go have a read. It's a lot of good stuff rediscovered from how we used to do things in the old days. So go have a read.
Could you give like a one sentence example of what that implies? What it means, specification?
So the idea of specifications is that you've got logic for context. Instead of having lots of if statements, you've got separate pieces of logic and you choose to use the right logic in the right context instead. So instead of having a calculate shipping that's got lots of if statements saying, well, is the customer overseas, therefore do it this way. If the customer's over there, do it that way. Those if statements are actually moved out to the point of where you decide which logic you're going to build.
Is that kind of like strategy pattern?
I don't know. I'm not a fan of patterns. I think the Gang of Four is
Like
terrible science.
figuring out where the customer is. So the classes that they have different ifs, but they're separated in their own.
It sounds similar.
It sounds say, okay, well, this is the context, so that's the strategy for me, or that's the strategy for me.
Yeah, it sounds similar.
Okay.
So I think we're moving on reusability. I think we're getting closer. We're not there yet, but I think we're getting closer. Does anyone disagree that we're creating stuff that's reusable? Ignoring, taking into account preferences over using lambda functions, of course. If we accept lambda functions, we're getting there. Okay, hopefully.